I've seen couples go round and round and round with words, and no matter how much intention they have and how much they want this to work, until they both can learn about those implicit signals they're giving off that are left over from the influence of early trauma and attachment, the words seem to go round and round and round often.
What is up, and welcome back to the Relationship School's Smart Couple Podcast. I'm your host, Jayson Gaddis. This is episode 148, coming to you from all the way over here in Boulder, Colorado. I'm grateful for your ears and your interest in having deeper, more fulfilling partnerships. This podcast is about monogamy, essentially. It's about long-term partnership. It's about romantic relationships and how we do them well after the drugs of the honeymoon phase wear off. We interview lots of different people here, like Stan Tatkin, Gabor Mate, Annie Lala, and so many others who have contributed powerfully to the relationship field and moving intimate relationships forward. We interview sexperts, couples, my wife, and other various people to help you get the most fulfilling relationship possible. And we challenge you here to engage in the work, quote, the work, because relationships take work. And if you are deadly serious about the work and doing some work to get a great relationship, because that's what's required, then you study and you train and you practice at places like the Relationship School. We are about to begin the Relationship School soon, and it's very, very exciting. Speaking of which, we had a contest, and we are about to announce some winners. So check this out. So we just finished the Facebook Live announcing the contest winner for the Relationship School's live weekend on embracing conflict. So this person is coming all the way to Boulder, Colorado to learn about conflict. If you don't learn how to figure this one out, you are going to suffer in a long-term relationship. So we just drew a name out of a hat because there were so many awesome videos in the Smart Couple Facebook group that we just drew a name out of a hat. That's how it went down. And if you want to watch that video, it's in the Smart Couple Facebook group now. Okay, people had to share their favorite episode and why they want to come to the Embracing Conflict weekend. And our winner, this year's winner, was Madison. Madison, her favorite episode was Satyan Raja's episode on the 4 freedoms that develop masculine depth and purpose. And she dug it because it helped her understand men better. And I thought that was an excellent episode as well. I had a lot of fun with that one and learned a ton as well from Satyan. So Madison, what's up? See you here in Boulder, Colorado, September 29th to October 1st for 2.5 days of heart-wrenching, heart-opening, inspiring conflict work. All right, with the Relationship School and this big community. Okay, so thanks for playing, everyone else. Jackie, Crystal, Brenda, Nancy, Jolene, Joel, Alexander, Rachel. Thank you guys so much for playing. And the runner-up to the contest was Jolene, I believe, who won 2 months free membership in the Relationship School Roots community. All right, where we practice every couple of weeks the tools that you learn here on the podcast and many more that you haven't learned about. Okay. All right. So thanks again, guys. And the early bird price goes up in 2 days. By the time you receive this podcast, it's going to go up August 11th. So if you're wanting to embrace conflict and learn how to do this, and you want to get a handle on this, because again, you will blow out and you will create more stress in your body, more stress in your nervous system and in the relationship, which causes all kinds of other problems when we don't learn how to navigate this stuff, okay? And I avoided it for years, so I know what it's like to avoid it. So if you want to come learn how to embrace conflict, the early bird price goes up after August 11th. So get in now if you want a deal and you want to bring a friend for half price. What could be better than that? Okay, we'll see you there and see you here. All right, our next guest is someone I studied with many years ago and is definitely a pioneer in the field of trauma and trauma psychotherapy and somatic psychotherapy. Her name is Pat Ogden. And I took a training with Pat about 10 years ago with my wife at the Sensory Motor Psychotherapy Institute. I was frustrated with the results I was getting with clients. Every client that came in had a lot of trauma. That's you, that's everyone else. We all have a little bit or a lot of trauma. Most of it's relational trauma. Sure, there's car accidents, but we're talking about relational trauma and how it lives in the body. And so in this episode, we really dive into the body and trauma therapy and how this can help you in your relationships. Because anyone that's smart knows that you get in a relationship, like a marriage, and after a couple of years, all of your childhood unfinished baggage and pain will come to the forefront. And that it happens that way so that we can heal it and learn how to work through it, whatever unfinished business we had. So we often start projecting our parents onto our partner, and it feels like we're back in our family. And turns out you married your mom, or you marry your dad, or some hybrid. And it can feel really terrible if you don't know how to work with this. And some of that comes up feels like a traumatic memory and trauma. And in this episode, Pat and I get into that and why that is and what we can do about it. So if you have any awareness that you have a little or a lot of trauma, this episode is going to be really beneficial to you. Okay, here's a little bit about Pat. Pat Ogden PhD is a pioneer in somatic psychology and the founder and education director of the Sensory Motor Psychotherapy Institute, an internationally recognized school specializing in somatic cognitive approaches for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder and attachment disturbances. Her institute, based in Broomfield, Colorado, has 19 certified trainers who conduct sensory motor psychotherapy trainings of over 400 hours for mental health professionals throughout the US, Canada, Europe, and Australia. This institute has certified hundreds of psychotherapists throughout the world in this method, including me, level 1. She's the co-founder of the Hakomi Institute, past faculty of Naropa University, where I graduated and got my master's degree from. She's a clinician, consultant, and sought-after international lecturer. She's the first author of 2 groundbreaking books in somatic psychology, Trauma and the Body, a sensory motor approach to psychotherapy and sensory motor psychotherapy, which she co-wrote with Kukuni Minton, who I also saw for a few sessions as a client. And these guys wrote that book years ago, and I read it, devoured it, and it was really useful for me. She hangs with people like Alan Shore, Bessel van der Kolk, and Stephen Porges, who has been on this podcast before. So, Pat has a tremendous amount of wisdom, especially if you're a psychotherapist or you've been to psychotherapy as a client and are familiar in any way with trauma. This episode is for you. Now, there is one heads up with this episode is the sound. Pat and I were on Skype. The video did not turn out at all. I think due to her camera on her computer, but the audio is a bit metallic and wonky at times. But rather than toss this out and wait many months to try to reschedule with Pat, I decided to go for it and publish this episode. So heads up, the audio ain't perfect, okay? So for you audio files out there that track that kind of thing, this one is probably one of our most challenged episodes with audio. So don't expect miracles with the audio here, but you can understand it. And I listened to it myself, and so just to make sure, I was like, okay, people can get the content here, and that's most important to me, is getting it in your ears and hands. All right. Okay. So as always, listen to the end for your action step, and remember, just a couple of days before this early bird price goes up on the Embracing Conflict weekend. Okay, folks, here is Pat Ogden. Welcome to the show, Pat Ogden.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, grateful for your time and energy here and all the work you've done, the trailblazing work. So I'd love to start with just a little bit about you, Pat. Can you give the listener a sense of, what you're up to in the world right now, who you are?
Okay, sure. Well, I'm the founder of the Sensory Motor Psychotherapy Institute. I founded that school in 1981, so I've been around a long time. Ron Kurtz's work was a big influence. I co-founded Hakomi Institute with him in 1980, and then my own school in 81. We're based in Boulder, Colorado. We teach all over the world. We have about 20 trainers that teach us work in a very strong administrative office. So we do trainings in the treatment of trauma, attachment failures, and certification, all through Europe, Australia, United States, Canada. Yeah.
Awesome. And you've written a couple books. I read your book, Trauma in the Body, with Kakuni, right?
Yes. Trauma in the Body was published in 2006. And another book entitled Sensory Motor Psychotherapy, Interventions for Trauma and Attachment, I wrote with Janina Fisher, published in 2015.
Cool. And back when I was a psychotherapist, I did the level 1 sensory motor psychotherapy training, partly because as a therapist, I just kept running into trauma. Like everywhere I went with my clients, there was no way around trauma would eventually come up. And it was extremely helpful because I finally got tools beyond my EMDR tools to work with trauma in the body. So it was just, again, thanks. It's very helpful.
That's
Yeah. So how did you, let's just rewind, just hear a little bit about you. How did you get into studying human beings and trauma in general?
I guess the short version is that I started working in a psychiatric hospital teaching yoga and dance in the early 70s. And what I noticed was that the patients who did my yoga classes seemed to get better faster. I mean, maybe they were going to get better anyway, and that's why they did the class, but they did get better, and that really piqued my interest in how the body could be useful in psychotherapy. And then I met Ron Kurtz, also in the early 70s, who introduced me to the body as a vehicle to access our early issues and the early imprints and beliefs that we formed. So that changed my life because I moved to Boulder with Ron and kind of apprenticed with him. I went to massage school. I became a golfer. I studied more movement approaches, Rolfing movement, continuum movement, etc. Because I really wanted to develop this idea that I had about the body, and that the body participates in our trauma and our psychological difficulties through its posture and its movement patterns. And I guess in terms of trauma, it was really my patients that taught me the most. In the late 70s, I think 77, I was asked by the director of Wardenburg Clinic, the clinic for the University of Colorado, for the students here in Boulder, to be the adjunct therapist or consultant for many of the young women who were not able to have sexual pleasure. We used the term orgasmic back then. So these women, I saw many of them, and I didn't really understand trauma at the time. So I was doing the emotional work that I had learned, going back into childhood issues, expressing a lot of strong emotion. And they started actually getting worse. And that was a huge wake-up call. Yeah. And I think what I know now is that with the strong emotions that were related to trauma, they couldn't integrate. They were kind of outside of their window of tolerance as they got into those feelings. So they couldn't integrate. So I remember saying to Ron, I'm just going to keep him in the body. I don't care about the emotions anymore. I'm just going to keep him in the body. And they started to be able to regulate a little bit better.
Yeah, that's like a revolutionary breakthrough there.
Yeah, yeah. And nobody was really writing much about trauma back then in the way that we understand it now. I mean, the Vietnam War had ended, and Charles Bigley was talking about, what did he call it, combat fatigue, but trauma wasn't really widely written about or understood back then. So I felt like I had to learn it the hard way from my patients, and they taught me so much.
Yeah. Now, it seems like, I just want to zero in on that distinction there, that early on in my training, I sort of, for whatever reason, thought that crying and emoting was really good because it was releasing. But what I learned through you was it was actually the sensations that were transforming the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say a little bit more about why a sensation is like helping take a person into their body and actually feeling the sensation with resources is so helpful?
Because trauma, first and foremost, impacts the body, our nervous system, and our motor system. If we're threatened, our arousal typically shoots up to prepare us to defend ourselves or to get away. So resolving trauma, the way we see it, happens first at that level.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if we are falling down the steps, which is a little trauma, right?
Yeah.
It's just a little threat. We will instinctively reach for the railing or any way to break our fall without even thinking about it. It doesn't go up into the cortex. Our survival mechanisms are really instinctive in the body. So I wanted to start addressing it on that level because people who are traumatized, their nervous system is usually dysregulated, needs to be settled down, and the signs of a dysregulated nervous system are very much in the sensation of our body, like that tingly feeling that you get when your adrenaline shoots up, or the numbness where you don't feel your body when you get in a hypoaroused dorsal vagal state. So I wanted to work with the nervous system and also with the motor system, like those animal defenses of fighting back and or getting away. And reinstate those in an adaptive manner. And that's all bottom-up processing through the body.
Yeah, and so much of psychotherapy maybe before that was top-down, right?
Mm-hmm. I had learned a lot of top-down and also working with strong emotions, like you mentioned, before I understood how trauma impacted the body. And in our theory in sensory motor psychotherapy, that's limited in its efficacy because trauma impacts the body so strongly.
Yeah.
And now, with Steve Porges' work on the polyvagal theory, that's very much reinforced this concept in the scientific.
Yeah, we had an amazing interview with him. Yeah. And can we just zero in on what is trauma for a minute? Because a lot of people listening might be like, oh, I don't have any trauma. I'm not traumatized. Because when we think of trauma, we might think of a veteran or someone who's been assaulted. But trauma kind of impacts all of us, doesn't it? And what is trauma?
Well, to me, there's a difference between trauma and being traumatized. Trauma is any threat to our security and survival. So yes, we've all experienced many traumas. We've fallen off the bike, we've fallen down the stairs, we've had a sporting accident, we've had a little car mishap, which are all threats. And some of us have had more major traumas like combat trauma or sexual abuse or physical abuse. Surgery is a trauma. Even though it's chosen, our body doesn't know the difference between the knife of a surgeon and the knife of an attacker.
Yeah.
So these traumas happen regularly in our lives. However, I think of traumatization as residing not in the event, but in the nervous system and motor system of the body. For example, if you take a child, some children can have a huge increase in their sympathetic arousal if they hear their parents yelling.
Yeah.
Because to them, that is a threat. They're not used to it. It's like it signals danger to them. Other kids will not have that sympathetic arousal, either because they're used to their parents speaking in that way, and they know it doesn't really mean any threat. So it's very context oriented. It lives body of individual, and we over time we can develop much more susceptibility to being traumatized if we have not been able to use the resources available to us or navigate early traumas successfully. Well, if we've had, say, for example, child abuse, we start to form a pattern of response that's based on the best instinctive response you could have. Like a child can't fight back against an adult perpetrator, and they can't get away, so they tend to freeze or become immobile, go into a feigned death response, and then that response gets tagged for future traumas, and that can really be very debilitating to someone's life.
Yeah, big time. I want to come back to that point if I remember, but I want to stop and say there's also the more subtle trauma, would you call neglect trauma? And so, for example, I'm thinking of the adult who's like, yeah, I don't have any of that. I was never abused as a kid. But then they end up in an adult relationship and their partner goes silent on them, and that feels threatening to them. That they go into a trauma response, right?
Right. Well, neglect is definitely traumatic. Absolutely. It's not a sudden trauma like an assault or
right.
abuse, right? But it's a pervasive trauma for a child, and it's a relational trauma.
Yeah, and then they it seems like the child gets, you sort of alluded to, the child gets used to that, parents yelling or parents distancing, and it's almost like there's still a low-grade stress going on, no?
That's correct, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so when this starts to show up in our adult lives, because a lot of people their survival strategies were very resilient, they might have blocked out memories of this, and they're like, no, I'm fine. But they end up, this is where we see it, especially if we work with couples, or you get married and a couple of years down the road, things get really hard. You start to go into some pretty fear-based, your nervous system is activated a lot. So will you help make the bridge there between whatever events happened to us as a kid now are playing out in our adult lives?
Yes. This is what is really so interesting to me right now in my career, and also to my colleague, Kikuni Minton. We're talking about this a lot, how to apply couples to, how to apply sensory psychotherapy to couples. And the way that I look at it is that there's two conversations going on between couples. One is the verbal conversation with the words where you're describing what's bothering you, et cetera, et cetera. But the other conversation is body to body.
Right, the neuroception.
In a way, neuroception, but much how neuroception is manifested in that body-to-body conversation. So this is fascinating with couples in terms of those early imprints on the body-mind and the nervous system. So I'll tell you one case example, shall I?
Yeah, great. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, of working with a couple who she and they both said that they fight all the time. They just have these arousal difficulties. They can go from 0 to 100 in like a second. And they have a lot of content about that. Like, they argue about this, they argue about that. They have all these words that go with explaining that dynamic.
Yeah.
So what I asked them to do was just for a moment, just to think about the last fight that they had and notice what happened in their bodies. Because that gets to the implicit self, that body-to-body conversation. And as they were both mindful, we work a lot with mindfulness and sensory psychotherapy, she noticed the impulse to come forward. And she even noticed some aggression. He noticed the impulse to shut down and pull back. Mm-hmm. And so the content was no longer relevant. It was that pattern from their early imprints that they were both reacting to.
Yeah.
So for her coming forward, she would come forward more and more as he withdrew more and more. So he was going more into a shutdown, frozen place, and she was going more and more into a fight response, and they couldn't get through it.
Yeah.
All they wanted was just contact with each other, but because it was implicit in their nervous systems and their body patterns, the words weren't helping with that.
Yeah. So how do you, in sensory motor psychotherapy, in this couple example, how do you begin to work with that? So the first step, it sounds like, is mindfulness, like noticing my body-to-body sort of pattern, the conversation below the words in our nervous system. And then how does a couple change that?
Well, you're right, the first intervention is mindfulness of your body reaction and how it affects your partner. Mm-hmm. So she learned that the more that she was like leaning forward and getting this demanding attitude, the more she did that, the more he withdrew.
Yeah. And
he learned that the more he withdrew, the more she did that. So the first thing is identifying the pattern so that it's really clear to them. So we spent time with that because neither of them wanted that.
Yeah.
And then we translated the meaning of that, for each of them. Like, for her, his withdrawal was something like, you don't even care about me. You're just going away. You want to leave me. And for him, her coming forward was that he'd done something wrong and he was going to be in trouble and she was going to, attack him. Yeah. And both this reflected their childhood patterns.
Uh-huh.
So from there's many, many ways to work with it. Options would be like, this is a fairly typical pattern with different specific couples. There's the pursuer and the withdrawer, and sometimes they switch roles, back and forth. And it's a fairly typical pattern. So with one couple, for example, it was the man, again, who was withdrawing, and the woman who was getting very emotional. I asked him at one point, I asked him to do that pattern where she was like getting emotional and getting very kind of accusing. And I asked him if he could, instead of withdraw, reach out to her. And he said, this feels really foreign, it's not what I want to do, but he was willing to try it. And as soon as he made that proximity-seeking action, she just melted.
Yeah.
And because she wanted. And he said, this feels like really weird to me. But he said, this is all I wanted too, was her to stop and really connect with me. So that that became like a resource for them. And then he needed some a certain kind of reaction from her too that we worked with. Sometimes though it goes kind of deeper into processing where because often I'm thinking of another couple where it felt like we really had two little kids there together.
Yeah.
Like he was grew up in a family where his parents were always threatening divorce, etc. So he was always like withdrawing and going, what did I do wrong? And her family was very different. In this case, she had not gotten attention. There was some neglect. She felt whenever they had arguments that he was leaving her, just like what happened in her childhood. So in that case, it was a different scenario. He really contacted that child inside him, and she was able to speak directly to that child physically, that he hadn't done anything wrong, that it was okay, that, So that was, and there was tears, and that was more processing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Pat, how does, can we rewire our nervous systems together as a couple? Is that possible in your world? And do you see that?
Absolutely, it's possible. We do see it. We do. I think in intimate relationships, there's just a tremendous possibility for the earned attachment, as many couple therapists say, where you can have abuse and you can have attachment failures, but you figure out how to form a secure attachment within the couple.
Yeah. Yeah, which takes two willing partners. I'm guessing it would be pretty hard if another partner was not that willing, right?
Oh, I think it takes two willing partners, but to me, what you're really working with is conversation beneath the words. I've seen couples go round and round and round with words, and no matter how much intention they have and how much they want this to work, until they both can learn about those implicit signals they're giving off that are left over from the imprints of early trauma and attachment, the words seem to go round and round and round often.
Yeah, totally. Do you think working with couples is one of the most effective ways or faster ways to heal that childhood trauma, the relational traumas?
I think it's an effective way. I think there are a lot of ways to heal relational traumas. I wouldn't say one way is better or faster. It depends on the individual. I mean, there's no easy answer. There's no one size fits all, and I just trust anyone may have the answers for all of it, because I sure don't.
Yeah.
I enjoy the questions.
Yeah.
I read a quote recently. Oh, I can't remember who said it, but it went something like, instead of seeking answers in your life, seek to explore the questions with other seekers who are asking these deep questions. And I find that really useful in my world of colleagues who are asking these questions.
Yeah, beautiful. I agree. It's great. Great reminder. Hey there, here's a quick interruption from our sponsor, the Relationships School. The Deep Psychology of Intimate Relationships is that 9-month class you never got in school, folks. 2 semesters long, just like college, but this time you're going to walk away knowing how to work through any interpersonal conflicts and challenges. And you're going to be that mature person in the room that knows how to deal with interpersonal stress and upset. Here is what one woman recently said about her experience.
Hi, my name is Bonnie, and I'm just in the final hours of Jayson Gaddis's Relationship School Intensive. This is the second weekend, and I am really in a place of feeling raw and humble and transformed and grateful for this experience. It has absolutely changed my relationship with myself and my significant other that I was really struggling with and actually split up with during the process of the relationship course, and then got back together with on very different terms, which feels super gratifying. And I would really recommend this to any of you all that are searching to have a deeper relationship with yourself.
All right, can you hear the tenderness, the warmth, and the inspiration coming through her big heart? Man, she worked hard and was really, at the end, just soft and available and humbled, and man, super powerful. And this kind of experience you can have also if you invest in yourself and put this at the top of your list for 2017, 2018. And you're going to have a different relationship life. I can guarantee it. All right. Go to jasongaddis.com/relationship school to take up one of those last remaining spots. And we'll see you in there. Okay. Back to Pat Ogden. Pat, how does the sensory motor work with couples differ from the adult attachment? You know, there's a lot of buzz around neurobiology these days, and the adult attachment books that are out. Is there any core difference there? Or is it all kind of going after the same stuff?
Well, I think we're going after the same stuff in different ways. I think the focus of sensory motor psychotherapy is on the body and how the nervous system and the movement patterns contribute to relationship. Whether you're working with a couple or not, you are giving off signals from your body, everybody is, about what they expect in relationships, what they're willing to put forward, etc. So that's a real focus of sensory motor psychotherapy, which is supported by much of the brain research. Alan Shore's research on the implicit self and the right brain, for example, all that's implicit. It's not accessed through just words.
Talking, right.
Yeah, and Steve Porges, Dan Siegel, the people that are on our advisory board that I work with regularly are also really interested in the body.
Yeah, you guys.
But in the therapy, our methodology is let's drop a level, because I mean, couples often come in and I listen for a little bit, and I'll say, I bet you've gone round and round about this, and they go, yes, we're sick of it.
Yeah.
Let's go beneath that to this implicit conversation that you're having, and that's where we work with the body, and as related to the emotions and the beliefs and all.
Sure.
So,
is talk therapy effective anymore? Like, does that do anything for us?
Well, again, I think all methods of therapy are really important, and all of them can be effective. There was research done a long, long time ago on different methods of therapy, and what they discovered was that any of those methods could be effective depending on the relationship. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of research out there that says talk therapy is effective.
Now, when you say depending on the relationship, you mean depending on the relationship between the therapist and the client?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's something about that relationship, right? I think that's kind of the common underlying effectiveness of any therapy is it seems to be so much about the therapist-client, right? What kind of bond you can form there.
I would phrase it in terms of the polyvagal theory. I would say that if the therapist-client dyad cannot stimulate the client's social engagement, so they have a degree of safety and orientation to the present moment, then you can't do anything.
Yeah.
I mean, in our work we teach, we work with the body, but if you don't have the social engagement system of the client on board, you can't do anything, because they're outside the window of tolerance.
Okay, let me translate for the listener here. So, like, social engagement system, my understanding is, that's the part of our brain and nervous system that engages with another human being. When we feel safe, we can come forward and be creative and learn. When we don't feel safe for whatever reason, because of our perception or neuroception or projections, we can't engage in the same way. Is that fair?
That I think is fair. I would say that. To be precise, Steve Porges' term, the social engagement system, to describe the ventral vagal complex, which is the myelinated branch of the vagus nerve, and it governs our facial muscles, our eyes, our middle ear, our larynx, can regulate the heart. And so that's like right now, even though we're on Skype, you and I are engaging through eye contact, face expression, listening to each other, speaking. So that's that social engagement system, and we really track with that, because it will go offline in therapy when one or both parties in a couple become threatened, and you'll often hear it in the tightening of the larynx or in avoiding of eye contact, etc. So in therapy, we want to stimulate that social engagement system.
Yeah, which is why it's so helpful for the therapist to keep doing their work on themselves, because they could get triggered by their client and their social engagement system. They could all of a sudden go flat in their affect, right? And that sends a threat response to the client. Right.
They can go flat, or they can get hyper-aroused. I mean, we all have our own issues, so I agree with you. Doing your own work is really important. In therapy, I mean, for the aware therapist, as Philip Brownberg says, there's a lot of growth that happens from being a therapist.
Oh my God, absolutely. Yeah. Our clients force us to face our own material, which is really helpful.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool. Well, a couple more questions and we'll wind down. What's another, I guess, just for the listener here, they're at home and they're resonating with this. They're like, yeah, I'm the pursuer, my partner's the withdrawer, distancer. This is our dynamic. And then we talk in circles. One sort of tip you've given so far is to start to track and be aware of our internal body response below the dialogue. What's another thing a listener can do at home as they start to play with this. If they, let's say they don't have a sensory motor psychotherapist with, online to help them, anything else they can do at home?
Are you talking about a couple?
Yeah, a couple.
Well, I think there are a lot of things. You can ask your partner what mannerisms and physical postures bother them, and I would pretty much guess that most partners would say, well, yeah, you get that look on your face, or, it's when you make that gesture where you look away, or it's when you tighten up and move back, or your voice changes and you sound like you're going away. I'm sure that they could probably name something physically or with the voice that bothers them. So I think each partner could ask the other partner, like, what are the nonverbal triggers that bother you? I'll bet the other partner can name them, and then you could explore that partner. Oh yeah, I do that, don't I? I tense up sometimes when we're arguing, and then they can get curious about that. Mm-hmm. Well, what is that? And they can ask their partner, well, what does that mean to you when I tense up? And the partner will say, well, to me it means that you don't want to be here, or whatever it means. And so if you start to pay attention to your body and your partner's body and the meanings that you're making of those gestures and physical stances and movements, that can be really helpful. Because when I've worked with a couple, the meaning that one member of the couple is making is hardly ever accurate. It comes from their own...
It's off usually most of the time, right?
Really off. Like one woman said that when her husband would get a tone in his voice like, let's solve this, and his body would go along, okay, we're gonna solve this thing, and her meaning of that was that he is not interested in me. All he wants to do is be a big shot and solve the problem. He's not even interested in me.
Right. He wants relief.
Well, her meaning was that he's not interested. He just wants to solve. Yeah, that was her meaning. It could be relief to somebody else, but that was so far from the truth for him.
Uh-huh. So can we ask our partner, hey, can you stop doing that tone of voice, or can you stop looking at me like that? And is that fair to even ask a partner to do that?
I don't know about fair. I think that would be a question for the partner.
Yeah.
And if couples can work with this together, both members of the couple want the same thing. They want a deeper connection. They don't want to fight, etc. So they all want the same thing. So if one partner might say, well, you know what? Is it okay with you if I point out when you're doing that, and maybe then ask you, is that okay with you? Mm-hmm. And if the other person really, but you can't. It has to be negotiated. It's a dyad. You have to work it together.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I worked with a couple just a couple of weeks ago where he heard criticism in her voice, like all the time, and she said, I'm not feeling critical, but there's something in her prosody. So they made the agreement that whenever he feels that, he will ask her, and she will give him an honest answer. And just the freedom that he can check out his meaning was really important for him.
That's a really good one, because that's common in a relationship where someone feels judged or criticized. So you're saying we can just ask, hey, are you judging or criticizing me right now?
Well, you can if the couple agrees to that.
Yeah.
Like one part of the couple can't decide. It's a relationship, so you want to work together on that. Mm-hmm. Is it okay with you if I ask? If I check out my assumptions.
And then if we have a yes consent ahead of time, we can ask and we can say, hey, are you judging or criticizing? That might be a nice approach for them.
Yes, yeah.
Because I'm misinterpreting all the time, is what you're saying, and it's important that I keep getting the accurate, what's actually going on.
Well, it is, and those misinterpretations are signaled by prosody and body stance and movements, not words.
Yeah.
Like I can say, oh, I wish that we could go to that movie I've been wanting to see. Or I could say, oh, I wish we could go to that movie I've been wanting to see. You know, a very different meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And people they're not aware of that physical communication or the implicit communication that gives off the meaning. And on the other hand, the recipient will, if they're really sensitive to criticism, if they ever criticized all through their childhood, they will hear criticism where it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
So the checking out is important. You know?
Yeah. Now, Pat, one more question about this couple. Let's say that one partner feels criticized, and let's say that relationship ended because of this, and it's now over, and this person's listening to this podcast right now, and they're like, yeah, I can totally relate. And they have this really sensitive button around feeling criticized, and let's say their partner, you know, most of the time wasn't actually criticizing them, but they felt that way most of the time. Is there something that person can do in individual psychotherapy to work on that issue of they have a trigger and a button around criticism? What's a step they can do?
Oh, absolutely. In individual therapy, they can very directly work with that part of themselves. And I mean, in sensory psychotherapy, we would work with what we call the organization of experience, like how experience is organized. When you hear anything that remotely sounds like criticism, you take it that way, and then what happens to you? You tighten up, you get defensive, you collapse and withdraw. And that's how you organize around those cues that you perceive or neurocept as threat, you know, actually. And so that usually takes us to those really intensive and attachment relationships where we develop beliefs like I'm not good enough, or I'm not going to make the grade, or it's not okay to make mistakes, etc. And then we become very sensitive to any cues that could be critical. So it's definitely just for the individual therapy now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool. And okay, one more add-on to that. Is there any harm in continually retelling the story of a traumatic memory or an experience? Is there any kind of flag that we've got to be careful of there as maybe practitioners, or if we're a client going into, and the person saying, well, okay, let's go back and hear you tell that story again. Like if there's not an effective technique to maybe move through it, is there any harm in that?
Well, there can definitely be harm in that, because retelling is reliving to some degree. If we start telling a story or even thinking about something from our past, it will activate the somatic circuitry, the brain circuitry, etc., to some degree that was operational at that time. So there's definitely trouble in this if you're just retelling the story all the time. Not that the story can't be told. I'm very aware, because clients often need you to hear the story, but you're adding something different. You're adding a relational component right there. And I'll often say to my clients, does this feel like the same old story? Mm-hmm. What difference is happening right now, if anything? Memory is very reconstructive, so we can, one of the techniques that we use that I think is really important is to go back into traumatic or painful memory, looking for positive elements, like what got you through, what helped you at that time, even if it was a stuffed teddy bear or nature, you know, and so you're adding something different to the memory, something new to the memory, and not going over that same circuitry in exactly the same way. I think that's critical.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's like we can get so tunnel vision, right, on the event or the experience that was negative, rather than remembering, oh, actually there was all this support in this at the same time.
Right, and we have to remember that we're never working with the memory anyway. We're working with what Ron Kurtz would call the leftovers. We're working with the effects of memory that still live and how we organize our experience today. And that's what's important. So see, to me, a traumatic memory, I mean, it's important sometimes for the therapeutic relationship to really hear what happened. But the biggest importance of a traumatic memory to me is that it catalyzes the body, the nervous system, the somatic system, and the emotions and the thoughts, so that you get a sense of what's not finished right here and now. So that the memory impacts you as if it's happening to some degree. And then they see, oh, wow, when the person remembers this, their shoulders are tightening up, they're ready to lash out. And they're here for therapy because they're always lashing out, you know. So if that hasn't had a chance to be solved based on that early memory. That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, great. So just a reminder, listeners, you know, there are numerous ways that we can try to heal these things, and sensory motor psychotherapy certainly is one of them. And if you're not partnered, it doesn't mean you can't do this. It means that, no, you can find a good practitioner that's going to help you sequence this, say, trauma through your body. Great. Pat, well, it's been really amazing. What's the, like, if you had one, I recently started the relationship school because I'm on a mission to help bring relational and social education to young people, particularly teens and young adults. And so I'm trying to reconstruct, okay, if we were to teach a class to young people, because it's obviously not taught and it's a missing element in schools, what do you think is if you were to come in as a guest teacher, or if you would give me advice, what do you think is the most important piece of advice you would give people about, like, in that class, like, to learn? What was the most important thing?
To learn about relationships?
Yeah,
to
learn about romantic relationships specifically.
That's an interesting question. I guess I would say that the most important thing is truly your relationship with yourself, your sense of yourself, your sense of being with yourself. And I would say that all healthy relationships come from that. So I would teach these young people about noticing this relationship with yourself, and how you can know how it lives in your body, how you connect with yourself, and how you can be in relationship from that, the nice, solid, grounded sense of yourself, not from a sense of, oh, I have to be in a relationship because that's, or this girl wants this from me, so that's what I'm gonna do. Like how to really be with yourself and come from there, which is very much an embodied sense of self. You can't do that in life.
Yeah, awesome, beautiful, thank you. Great, Pat. Where seems like you're up to some awesome stuff. What's like one thing you're up to, and where can people find you right now?
Well, they can find us on the internet. We're based in Boulder, but we teach all over Europe, Canada, Australia, and many, many places. We're up to developing our program for children, for couples, for groups. So we're really branching out, and we have a wonderful team of trainers and admin staff who are developing curriculum in those areas. So it's very exciting.
Awesome. Thank you. And we'll include any links in the show notes so people can find you and the Sensory Motor Psychotherapy Institute easily. And great. Pat, thank you just for all your wisdom, so much experience here, helping us understand trauma in the body and relationships.
You're welcome. Nice to see you again, Jayson.
Yeah, thanks again, Pat. All right. Here's your action step. Besides going and checking out Pat Ogden and the Sensory Motor Psychotherapy Institute and her books, Trauma and the Body, okay? It's a little technical, so it's definitely for clinicians, not so much for the layman, by the way. But here's your action step, okay? As a couple, and then if you're single, you can think back and reflect back on your last partnership and think about what this would have been like to have this conversation. But about 30 minutes in, we talked about this notion of asking your partner, hey, what body language, mannerisms, facial expressions, tone of voice, which ones of me trigger you the most? What behavior is it that I do, honey, that triggers you the most? And then take turns. Okay, got it. Okay, it's my tone of voice. And what about you? Which one triggers that I do that triggers you the most, sweetie? And then you share with her or him the one that you get triggered by the most that they do. Okay? And share. Okay, go for nonverbal only. Nonverbals. So tone of voice can be a nonverbal. So it's less about the content or what you say, it's how. So it could be the pitch of your voice, low or high. Could be the eyes, the furrowing of the brow, the eye rolling. It could be just that you turn your shoulders in. Go for nonverbals when you talk about this. Okay? And then I loved what she said about how we make meaning of it. So ask each other, what does that mean to you when I do that? When I turn my shoulder and I look away from that, what do you interpret? And then take turns. This is really good stuff because this is neuroception, right? This is, again, on a below our perceptions, our animal in us is getting triggered. And it's like, okay, there's something I do or you do that triggers the other person. What is that? And how do I interpret it? Well, I interpret it you're mad at me. It's like Stephen Porges was saying on his podcast when he woke up in the morning and nearly fainted. With his flat affect, his wife interpreted that he was upset with her or something like that. So it's fascinating to me how we misinterpret and how we read into things. And again, this is our past showing up in the present. So have those conversations, get curious, and have fun with it. All right. Then you can start to work to have each other's backs on that. Well, what could I do to ease up the pain there? What could I do to consider your feelings more there? Okay. All right. Awesome. Now, if you want to go deeper, of course, you can sign up for the relationship school. Okay. We still have some spots left in our 9-month training. And if you want to practice listening, practice calling a timeout, practice setting a boundary, practice speaking in a way that works for them, then you want to come to the Relationship School Roots community. You can apply for that. Okay, $47 a month, guys. It's not a lot to ask for you to step up and start practicing in this community and getting some traction, right? Really, the people that I see get the most results are people that practice or are involved in some kind of relationship type community and they're doing ongoing work. Those people are light years ahead of people who sit in isolation and try to figure this out in their head. All right. That's my challenge to you as we wind down. Once again, thank you all contest entries and people who took a risk and shared their video in the Smart Couple Facebook group. Thanks so much, guys. And to everyone else, thank you for listening, and we'll talk very soon.